Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Boker Tov. I'm David Zinner, Vice President of the Jewish Funeral Practices Committee of Greater Washington and your moderator for today's webinar. As you know, this webinar is being recorded. The Jewish Funeral Practices Committee of Greater Washington is a nonprofit, tax-exempt organization with over 50 member congregations in Northern Virginia, DC, and Maryland. Our new website is at jewishfuneralsdc.org, so check it out. On our site, you will find our contracts for traditional low-cost funeral packages with Heinz Rinaldi and Cunningham Church, and our contract with Fram Monuments. We are looking for new board members. If you're interested, you can chat to Art Hessel, who's on the call. He's our president, or you can find his contact information on our website, jewishfuneralsdc.org. Today's webinar is titled, How to Increase Participation in Your Chavrah Kadisha. We're thrilled to have two nationally recognized experts in this topic who will be sharing their experience and suggestions. Our plan for the morning is to hear from our two experts, then give them some space to ask questions of each other, and then open the Q&A to everyone on the webinar. When you get to the Q&A, we ask that you use the raise hand button or just raise your real hand, and we'll call on you. Please keep your questions short and to the point, and please keep yourself muted during the webinar so that we don't get lots of background noise. So if you haven't muted yourself yet, go ahead and hit that button all the way on the left, the little turn off the microphone button, so that we can hear the presenters really clearly. Our first presenter will be Steve Paretsky. Steve co-leads the Valley Chavrah Kadisha in San Fernando and Conejo. Did I pronounce it right? Conejo Valleys of Los Angeles. This community Chavrah Kadisha first provided tahara only a few months ago, January, I believe, right? Was your first one, right?
Correct.
So yet their organizing and education work probably began more than a year ago. We look forward to Steve's insights as a newly formed, vibrant, and innovative Chavrah Kadisha. Our second presenter will be Nina Rubin. Nina's been building community and teaching in Jewish communities for more than 40 years. 30 years ago, she began the Chavrah Kadisha in Fort Collins, Colorado, where every member of the Jewish community is viewed as a member of the Chavrah. One Colorado website asserted that the Chavrah Kadisha of Northern California, with its 100 volunteers, has the highest level of participation of any Jewish burial society in the world. So we're looking forward.
Just a correction, David.
Say it again.
I'm in Colorado, not California. Yeah.
Did I say California?
Steve's in California.
Yes, I know. I'm reading my script. It says one Colorado website. Okay. Anyway, we look forward to hearing her perspective as a veteran organizer with many years of Chavrah Kadisha experience. So we'll start with Steve. Steve, it's your baby. Go ahead. Take it away.
Thank you, David. And if I get near to 15 minutes, please, it's me, so that I know I tend to go long. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you. And thank you, David, for the introduction. I don't know how nationally known I am, but my family certainly knows me on the East Coast. So first, by way of background, you're going to hear an interesting contrast here today between Nina and myself, and I think we were set up that way on purpose. So maybe keep that in mind when you're listening to both of us. At the Valley Chavrah Kadisha in Los Angeles, we are highly organized, which reflects my experience, my business experience, and my ideas about what works the best. Nina's had an incredibly successful, more what she calls feral approach, which you'll hear more about in a few minutes. So that just gives you an idea of sort of the contrast that we're styles that we're working with, and I think it's sort of Talmudic, sort of in its approach, where you sort of set boundaries by giving examples at various ends of an issue, as opposed to stating a general principle, right? So both ends can work in this case, I think, and lots in between too. So I was born in central New Jersey, grew up in a conservative household, moved out to LA 32 years ago, raised a family here. I've always been affiliated one way or another. My wife converted, and when the kids were of school age, we joined a Reform synagogue out here. I've always been active as a volunteer and as a board member in the synagogues that I've served with. In fact, the last 3 years, before I retired 3 years ago, my last 3 working years was as executive director of a synagogue. That was a distinct shift from my decades of being a finance guy, a banker, and a financial advisor. Um, uh, when my father died in 2004, the funeral director in Neptune, New Jersey, asked me if I wanted to sit Shmirah for my dad. And I said, I don't know, what's that? And I considered myself a fairly informed Jew at that point. And learned, he told me what it was, and I did it. And it ended up being a beautiful, impactful, maybe life-changing event for me. It was a wonderful time for me to get closure with him, to talk to him, to say goodbye to him over the course of an evening. And I remembered at that time just committing to myself that I would learn a lot about what I didn't know about Jewish end-of-life practices, because I saw how beautiful they could be and how uplifting they could be. Fast forward to a few years ago, actually, to just before COVID, and the rabbi that I was working with was highly interested in starting a Chavrah Kadisha in Los Angeles, and had experience with starting a Melton Adult Mini School a few years prior, which was a community-based adult educational program. So we got together and agreed that it was time to try and start a community-based Chavrah in Los Angeles. I retired and then decided I had the time to commit to doing the work. Then, of course, COVID came. We put it on the shelf for a while, but a year ago, January, we started up again. We now have a 501c3 not-for-profit organization. We have a board. We have 66 volunteers. My experience working with Chavrah Kadisha volunteers over the past 15 months is highly informed by my experience working over the past 30 years with volunteers in other organizations. For example, American Youth Soccer Organization, AYSO, where I ran a local soccer park with 2,000 players and about 500 volunteers, including putting on tournaments with hundreds of volunteers and festivals with hundreds more. Sitting on various boards, working on various committees, working as a volunteer myself. All of this background informed what we've done with the Valley Chavrah Kadisha. One of the first things we did a year ago was to build a leadership team. Most of our initial volunteers have become part of our leadership team. These are folks who are interested and serial volunteers. They were enthusiastic. They were the first ones to find us and sign up. So they were a great group to draw on for our leadership team. Our leadership team forms our various committees, whether it be website or liturgy or policies or outreach or fundraising. Our outreach committee is responsible for community education and volunteer management, the two of which we believe have substantial overlap. It's our largest committee, reflecting both its importance and the amount of the work that it has. We have 8 on the committee, and we have 18 volunteers who have committed to work with the committee. What the committee does includes community education, liaison roles with various Jewish institutions, volunteer outreach, and onboarding. David promised that we'd address recruitment, outreach, marketing, publicity, and clergy support, so I've structured my comments accordingly. So let's start first with recruitment and outreach. I'll address it this way: finding volunteers and keeping volunteers. All right. So as far as finding volunteers, what we've done what we've done that's worked or what we plan on doing include intro sessions. These were Zoom intro sessions organized with synagogues that we work closely with. Kavod V'Nechum, as I'm sure you all know, is a fabulous organization that helped us to organize these sessions. which we advertised through clergy and staff at eight or nine local synagogues. By way of more general background, LA, as you may know, second largest Jewish population in the United States, about 600,000 Jews. Every sort of Jewish organization you can shake a stick at, plus. So we have different issues than smaller communities have. Ours is often having enough arms and legs to do all the work and having to prioritize what we do. So intro sessions advertised through synagogues, through their newsletters, etc. We had probably 30 each at a couple of sessions where we got our initial volunteers after describing what our plans were. We always find volunteers when we do community education, when we make presentations to synagogues or schools or groups of hospice workers or nurses. We encourage word of mouth through our existing volunteers. We consider them one of the greatest sources and one of the most sort of reliable sources of new volunteers, friends, neighbors, family. We established a website, which we put a fair amount of time and work into. It's easy to volunteer on our website. You click on a button and put in your email address and your phone number, and we'll contact you and talk to you about it. We have what we call relationship managers who explore educational opportunities and look for volunteers at various institutions around town. And of course, family members of those who we've served, even though it's a small group right now, we've already found that to be a source of volunteers for us. So we do a variety of things with the philosophy of that you never have too many volunteers. By way of keeping volunteers, it's a whole different issue, of course. There are many ways. Engagement, of course, is a huge aspect of keeping volunteers interested and active. We have a bunch of volunteers, and we haven't done a lot of Shmirah and Tahara yet. So we do have an issue of engagement until we ramp up and have more service to provide. What we have done, and by the way, Nina is a master at this. I hope that you'll talk about this in your experience, Nina, because I've learned a lot just by talking to you about this. But one of the things that we've done is establish a thoughtful onboarding process, which includes training. David, did you have a question? You've got your hand up. Oh, thank you. We've established a thoughtful onboarding process, including training. We're sensitive to volunteers' interests. We get to know them. We meet them face to face. Try and understand their motivation for volunteering. We keep folks informed. We keep their information in a database so that our leadership team knows their background and why they're with us and what they're interested in. So we know who to reach out to when we're asking for assistance, for example. We have events. We have social events. We have learning events like a Zion Adar event. We have training events. We ask people to do committee work. All these things keep people involved with the organization and learning. We let folks know about webinars that can deepen their education and understanding about Chavrah Kadisha work. The result is we've gone from 0 to 60 in 1 year without pushing. And we're trying to balance the amount of service that we're providing and the ability to keep people engaged with the number of volunteers that we have. There's nothing worse than an underutilized volunteer. About marketing and publicity. First, you got to understand the purpose of your marketing publicity, right? So for us, it's been fundraising, it's been finding volunteers, it's been educating folks about Chavrah Kadishas and Chavrah Kadisha work, and it's been about preparing people to make informed Jewish end-of-life decisions. Some of the methods that we've used that we found useful is, firstly, we've developed our own assets, speakers, brochures, a Jewish burial wishes letter that allows people to just check boxes and make choices and let their family and other important folks around them know what their wishes are. We've got an occasional newsletter that we send to local clergy. We've got a brochure. We've made use of the local Jewish journal to get ourselves publicized. We use our website, of course. So in addition to developing our own assets, we leverage established resources for Jews. There are many of these in Los Angeles, right? We work through synagogues and temples. We try and get into their weekly newsletters. We try and make presentations to their groups. We work with funeral homes, especially their advanced planning staff. We work with clergy schools, many of which are in Los Angeles, to make sure that the upcoming rabbis and cantors and chaplains are informed about what we are. We've gotten volunteers that way. We work with Federation, JCCs, rabbinical groups, and of course we work with end-of-life professionals. Their new groups seem to be popping up every day, right? Death doula groups, hospice staff, chaplains, etc., mikveh staff. The Kavod V'Nechum folks have deep experience in many parts of the country, and they've been very helpful in introducing us to many contacts. So my thanks go out to them also. Last but not least, clergy support. It's important to have it, and it's important to give it. It helps to have clergy on the team. At the Valley Chavrah Kadisha, we have rabbis, cantors, and chaplains, and seminary students as volunteers. People listen to clergy different than they do to lay people. So if you use them judiciously, it can be very impactful for you. Experienced clergy also really usually knows the staff at funeral homes and at other Jewish organizations and have their confidence. Rabbinic volunteers form our policy committee. They've helped us create our liturgy, and they help us respond to issues as they come up. Clergy are also really good at speaking, so they can represent the Chavrah Kadisha well in front of a variety of groups. And on the other hand, we really try hard to give support to clergies, since they're probably among the most fully scheduled professionals out there. We're trying to be very, very conscious of that. We only use them in limited situations. We try and respect their time, support their members, and provide ideas and texts for their end-of-life sermons and drashot. So there's an outline of Valley Chavrah Kadisha, what we've done in our year plus of existence. And some of that is aspirational, but most of that is in our planning. And now you're going to hear a whole different story.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, and now Nina, your turn. Go for it.
So I was raised in a conservative community with a mystical Orthodox rabbi who believed that girls needed to be trained. Chavrah Kadisha was a part of my life growing up. And as a young teenager, the youth group helped serve and support the Chavrah Kadisha banquet every year. So that was my original introduction, and I had family in it. 45 years ago, I moved to Fort Collins and was a founding member of our congregation here. From the get-go, the goal was to build a sacred community. It was a community of immigrants. Everybody came here knowing nobody. And we are post-denominational. We are specifically not affiliated because we want people to explore, stretch, and find their own level. We did not set out to create a Chavrah Kadisha. We set out to create a sacred community. And since our average age was about 35, maybe even less, we weren't real concerned with death 45 years ago. 30 years ago, we lost our first member and realized we had to have a cemetery. The family wanted them buried in a traditional way in a Jewish cemetery, which of course we did not have. We had 24 hours. We did a handshake agreement with the city and buried them 24 hours later in a Jewish cemetery in Fort Collins. The city gave us access to a section that we could kosher, consecrate, and use. We were sure we had more graves than we could ever use. That was 2 sections ago. So about 5 years after that, we had our second death in the community. And this family wanted a full traditional everything. And we contacted folks in Denver to come help us, and we organized JFPCGW. And we had people sitting around the clock. Nobody knew what we were doing, but we got her done. We have always responded to need here. It was 30 years ago when we actually completed our first full-scale Tahara JFPCGW burial in our own cemetery. And what we found is we had more people than we knew what to do with. 9/11 came. We all of our burials that we had done Tahara on were women, because the only senior citizens we had here were widowed bubbies who came to live near their grandchildren. So we had a very active women's Chavrah. In 2001, one of our members flew her father here on air ambulance to do hospice here. And he was wildly resistant because he needed a traditional Jewish burial. And she said, we have a great Chavrah here, you'll be fine. She forgot to tell us. And when he died a couple days after 9/11, we had never done a men's Tahara. So he died on a Saturday night. On Sunday morning, we started making phone calls. Men were going, wait, you want me to do what? I don't think so. Left a lot of messages because a lot of people weren't home. By noon, but finally I had 4 people to come in at 1 o'clock. By noon, my phone's ringing, and every single person I called said, I need to do this. Even the ones who had said, no, I have no interest whatsoever, all decided this is important. They were still reeling from 9/11. Many of them hadn't reached family, didn't know what was going on. 18 of them showed up at the funeral home. And it was like, I know some of you told me you had places to be. You need to go now. Anybody not a one of them would leave. I said, well, okay, I'm happy to sit with my back to you and walk you through this. They said, well, is that the traditional way? I said, well, no, but it's allowed. They, no, we have to do this right. We have to do this right. They sat there and studied the book together, divided up every task. The 18 of them went in there and completed this Tahara. And then an amazing thing happened. They stepped back out when they were done, and then they sat down and debriefed for an entire hour about the importance of properly burying somebody when they knew there were so many people who would never be properly buried, and how this helped them deal with their grief. That was the beginning of our men's Chavrah. We don't have a leadership team. We've never had a training. People have no interest in coming to training. They have an interest in being part of a sacred community and doing holy work. At the very first Chavrah Kadisha conference that Kavod Menachum held, one of the sessions I went to was the problem with volunteers. And I was so excited I went to that. And they asked me what my problem with volunteers was. And it's like, I need to have meaningful work for people to do. We don't have enough deaths to make people feel like they're part of something. I got the stink eye. Apparently, you can have too many volunteers, Stephen. And that's when we started branching out and sewing shrouds and cooking meals of condolence and freezing them. So there was always meals ready to go to families. We had minyan makers. We created a new thing called a Shmira minyan, or excuse me, a Shloshim minyan. Because we were from other places, people often went and sat Shiva far away. And oftentimes that didn't meet their needs, because when they were back visiting their home communities, it didn't feel sacred community to them. And when they finished, they came back here, they got things organized. And at 30 days, the whole community would show up and they would have another Shiva minyan at Shloshim. And it became a very powerful thing for people to return to their communities and grieve with their community here when they came back. So a lot of what we have done over the years has been organic. Every Tahara we do has new people and experienced people. When I was growing up, creating a Chavrah Kadisha in a cemetery was an obligation. And it was treated that way. And the people who did this work did it from a point of obligation. To me, it's important for us to move that to opportunity and realize that everyone has the capacity to be a part of a sacred community. And what's important is people's motivations or beliefs are not important in doing this, which is something different than what I grew up with. Because I can be here because I have a need to do highly sacred work and I believe in the soul and the transmission of the soul. And that's great. I can be here because I believe people should support each other in times of grief. I can be here because I have unresolved grief about my own loved ones' issues and I wasn't able to do this for them. Oftentimes the people in the room, the person they see on the table is not necessarily the person on the table. So letting people know that whatever their motivation is, it's great. And then there's the other side of this, which is there are very few places in Jewish life where nobody's going to complain about what you're doing. Nobody's going to have a better idea. Nobody's going to judge you. In this case, if you show up with the right intention, you're already perfect. We start the ritual with an apology. We're here to honor you. We're doing the best we can. We hope we don't offend you. We end with an apology. We've done our best to honor you. We hope it was good enough. If it wasn't, we hope you'll forgive us. How many times in Jewish communal life do you get to be absolutely perfect just for being there? When we started sewing shrouds, I had many people approach me and they said, it breaks my heart that I can't help you. I never learned how to sew. I have no idea how to do that. And I would say, so come and learn. And it's like, oh, I couldn't sew a straight seam. It's like, guess what? No one's ever complained. You know, and the ability to feel that what we're doing is accessible, that empowers people. No judgment. And meeting volunteers' needs. Oftentimes in volunteer organizations, we're really focused on how we can get volunteers to meet our needs. But when we shift that focus as an opportunity for our volunteers and we try and figure out what our volunteers need, it's amazing how many volunteers you have. I have over 100 volunteers. That doesn't sound like many compared to Stephen's Chavrah, although we only have 500 people here. So 100 volunteers represents 20% of our community. And that number is raising all the time. And even when we face challenges, when we choose to see them as opportunities, the pandemic was not a challenge. The pandemic was an opportunity. When we moved to virtual Tahara, people who had been on the edge and weren't sure would come to a virtual Tahara and then call up and say, oh yeah, put me on the list. I can do this. And the other thing was my very experienced Tahara members who did virtual Taharas called and said, you know, that was the first time I've really understood the liturgy at my whole body level, because when I'm doing a Tahara, I'm always being concerned about what am I supposed to be doing, and I want to do it right. So my people who had never done a Tahara found it valuable, and my people who had done many Tahara found it valuable. So the important thing to me is that we make things accessible and we understand. I understand that we have 5 minutes left. I will rush through. This is the hardest speech in the world to give is a succinct one. I think all people want to matter, belong. They want to feel competent. They don't want to feel judged. They want to think their time is respected, and they want to commit at their own comfort level. So what we do is we have an accessible program with on-the-job training. I do want to talk about, in the last 40 years that I've been working with this, 35 years with this, we have had a total of 6 different rabbis at various times, some transitional. Every single one of them has participated in a Tahara. Every single one of them did their first Tahara here. And they were really pleased to do it. And they all reported a certain amount of anxiety. And then being told, don't worry, you don't have to know anything. There will be people here who will help you through, and you participate at your own comfort level, but we want you to know what's going on in the room. And every single one of them came out going, oh my God, this is amazing, and have been advocates for us ever since. We have wonderful partnerships in town with our funeral homes, with our hospice, with our care facilities, with other clergy. We have been invited to do presentations in multiple faith communities to talk about how do you develop a death committee that helps people with their advance directives, that lets people care for each other, because the idea of being part of a sacred community that cares for its members, I often am part of a bet den when people choose to convert. And one of the questions I ask conversion candidates is, are you aware that you will likely get a call from the Chavrah Kadisha at some point? And you're welcome to say yes or no, but are you aware that you'll be getting a call? And I have had more than one of them say to me, that's why I converted. I want to be a part of a community that takes care of people from birth to death. I want to be that person, and I want to benefit from that kind of stuff. So when you look at it as an entire community, we don't have a leadership team. We have at least 10 people who can serve as a Rosh or Roshah, and who are comfortable doing that. And we have a huge amount of people who know what they're doing. In many ways, things have expanded throughout the community. We have a high holiday practice here where we do community mikvah. We all go down to the mikvah together to prepare for the high holidays. Because the ability to understand that this sacred work creates a spiritual vulnerability, which is a phenomenal thing to feel that close to God. And also to recognize that we need to learn how to deal with those holy experiences. So I think I'm out of time. So thank you.
Thank you, Nina. That was great. And as you can see, we tried to find two speakers who had very, very different experiences and very, very different approaches to this topic. And because it's so different, we wanted to give them a chance to talk to each other a little bit. So Steve, do you want to go first? And maybe do you have any questions for Nina about her experience as contrasted to yours, or other insights that she might be able to share?
I do. First of all, it's wonderful that you have a mikveh in this relatively small community. That's fabulous.
Oh, fair enough. We're still working on building our own. We travel to Boulder and Denver for a mikveh.
Okay, it's not that far.
To a hot springs.
But so what I wanted to know is, if with volunteers who aren't interested in training, how do you get folks up to speed in terms of their ability to understand and do taharas and perform taharas?
So what we have found in building competency, we invented the Shmira box, which has various editions of Psalms in it, some progressive translations, some very traditional translations, but it also has books on Jewish death awareness. And it also has books on afterlife, and it also has poetry. And now it's full of drawings and poetry and things that people wrote while they were sitting and added to the box. So when you're sitting, you have this box of traditional stuff, new stuff, personal stuff, and you are able to educate yourself as you're sitting, and the deceased, because oftentimes we are obviously burying people who are aware of what we do, but really don't have an extensive knowledge of the process. So we encourage people, as they're participating, to make themselves aware of the process. One of my favorite stories, we had a new convert who was sitting her first Shmira, and she had been reading the book about what do you do when you sit Shmira. Well, she was sitting Shmira, and an Orthodox rabbi walked into the room and decided to check her yichus. Where are you from? Who are your people? Where did you grow up? What synagogue were you in? And this woman, who was a newly minted Jew, turns to him and says, Rabbi, I would love to have this conversation, but it can't be now. Right now, it's important for me to focus my attention on my work at hand, and this is not an appropriate conversation for us to be having at this time in this place. He apologized to her and walked out of the room. I saw that, and it made my heart sing, that here was this Jew, new Jew, who had the ability to feel confident enough in what she knew to say, that's not a proper conversation while I'm sitting Shmira. You'll have to contact me another time. Which thrilled me no end.
Very cool.
As far as Tahara goes, because we have so many people here, there is always at least one buddy for every new person. And we always, I mean, we rarely have a Tahara with less than 6 or 7 people in it. So anybody knows that they can walk out at any time. And it's really easy to volunteer for something if you know you can walk out at any time. Not that I've ever had anyone walk out. I've had at least 2 people walk out and go, oh my God, this is the work I was born to do. One of them became a president of Kavod V'Nechum's board, and one of them became a funeral professional. And these are people who literally just walked in for the first time, and were moved so that it was like, I guess I have to change my life now. So the truth of the matter is, what we're actually doing is not that complicated, as long as there's one person in the room who knows how to move a body. Most everything that we do is minhag, not halacha. And what I also learned at my first Kavod V'Nechum conference is there are people who are sure that what they're doing has been done since Sinai, but it doesn't look anything like each other. You know, people have such different, I mean, they all have the basic same, but the way of accomplishing it looks so very different. So we developed our own manual here over time with input from many of our members. And our rituals continue to evolve as new situations approach. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's helping people learn to be competent.
Nina, we want to give you a chance to ask a question of Steve also.
Well, I'm fascinated with your level of organization. I recently have a new volunteer who has come who actually has those skills, and looking for the first time to automate our asks, and wondering how you feel about the automated ask versus personal touch, and how you.
What do you mean by ask?
When there's a need.
Okay.
We're setting up. We need Shmira from here to here, and we need a Tahara team at this time. Can you help?
So our view from the get-go was that our asks would be coming from either funeral home directors or clergy, by and large. I expect that we will get some asks directly from families who've become aware of us. And actually, of the 3 Taharas that we've done, 1 actually was directly from a family. But what we have done is...
Can I just clarify? The ask that's going out to the Chavrah to get people to come fulfill a need. You've already got the request. You now need to fill the request. Tell me about your system and how it's working.
So we have a master. We have a volunteer listing. Every volunteer that we have at the Chavrah, we've had conversations with about their background with Tahara and Shmira, their training with Tahara and Shmira, their comfort doing various things, their availability at various times, whether if they want to participate in a Tahara that involves a cremation, all sorts of issues. We've tried to gather a bunch of information that will allow us to ask them to participate in something that they're willing to participate in. And so we have a master spreadsheet, and our leadership team has access to that. Actually, not our leadership team. We have a dispatch team who on a rotating basis are on call. And so a phone call comes through the phone number on our website, or an email comes generated by a request on our website, or someone calls me or someone calls a rabbi, and we just get information other than those formats. The person on duty is notified, and they go into action, putting together a Shmirah team, a Tahara team, whatever is necessary. They will go to our volunteer listing, and we also have sub-listings for Shmirah volunteers and for Tahara volunteers. We have a sub-listing for Roshim volunteers, and they can go and they can sort volunteers by whatever issues may be involved. If people are out of town, we ask them to let us know. If they're out of town for more than a couple of days, we ask them to let us know, and some people are good about that and some people aren't. So we sort for availability, and we put together a very brief email. The dispatch volunteer puts together a very brief email to let's say it's a Tahara, to our male Tahara volunteers, if it's a guy, right, who are available, who have no issues that we know of in terms of what's going on with that particular Tahara. And the email will provide the basic information that we know at the time. That's the time and date of the Tahara, any issues, the location, and we ask them to join us if they're available. And we get typically we'll send that out via email and text. It's pretty quick and pretty easy, and that's the way that's the way we get our feedback from the team in terms of who's interested and available in a particular case. Similar goes for Shmirah, right? We have a sub list of our master volunteer list, which is all of our volunteers who are interested in Shmirah services, and we'll send out. It tends to be simpler in that case. There are a lot fewer issues. It tends to revolve around availability more than other things. What we do is we set up a shared spreadsheet that lists the beginning hour and the last hour of the Shmirah services by day, and we send out a shared spreadsheet page to all of the volunteers and say, this is the mate or the meta. This is the location. This spreadsheet shows you the hours that we plan on sitting Shmirah. Please fill in your name in the blocks that you can sit Shmirah, and it gets done automatically. The dispatch volunteer sees as soon as somebody fills in their name in their shared documents, the dispatch volunteer sees the holes that are being filled. And the dispatch volunteer can then become proactive after a while if they see that there's a particular chunk of time that's not being covered. They can reach out to the volunteers again, saying, "Look, guys, we need coverage from midnight to 4 a.m. tomorrow. Can anybody do a 2-hour shift?" Just follow up and do their best to fill in the time.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a bit of a contrast here between the two groups, and that makes it interesting. We're going to start taking questions. So Madison, I'm going to call on you second to get one of the questions that people gave us in the registration, but we're going to start with Alice, who's got her hand up. Alice, can you go ahead and ask your question or make your comment?
It's all been very interesting. I am hoping to get some thoughts on getting some of our reluctant male members of the congregation for Shmirah and Tahara. We've got our women's group going. We're a large congregation, and whenever I approach a man, they are so turned off. Any thoughts on how to approach the men in a way that they will feel comfortable?
So I have some strong feelings about that. I think 9/11 was a gift to our community because all of a sudden men had a reason to go, oh my gosh, this is something I need right now. And so starting with an 18-person roster helped a lot. But I also think that there are some societal issues I think a lot of men have issues about judgment and perfection and are worried about volunteering to do something that's alien to them. I think the approach might go better if you have some sort of a men's group or a male rabbi to talk about men and spirituality, and even life and death. I mean, one of the things that we focus on here is that life is better when death is in it, that when you are aware that we are all here for a limited time, life takes on a whole different meaning. That we live in a culture that wants us to not remember that we're mortal. They want us to be happy by spending money and spending time on computers and eating and drinking. The things that fill people's lives, or that our culture would tell people are good things to do. I mean, what our culture considers self-care is the opposite of self-care, as far as I can tell. So just inviting people. A lot of our male members have come from some of our Chavrah Kadisha banquets, trying to pick topics that are actually interesting to them. Because frankly, I think most people are death curious, and giving them a safe place to ask questions or deal with that death curiosity. And this goes all the way down into our religious school, that allowing kids to have content in their religious schools, because kids are wildly death curious. The youngest person we ever had as a volunteer was at a sewing session, and it was a 5-year-old child who was pulling a drawstring through a pair of pants because her dog had just died. And her mother brought her to a sewing session because it was a place where she could talk about death with people who she knew would be happy to answer her questions and talk to her about death. So the idea that we meet people where they are, and sometimes with men that can be a little challenging, but finding a male person to make those asks is helpful. And being able to present this as an opportunity and a way to serve community in a very time-limited way, and in a way that people truly appreciate. And that for anybody who grew up in a community with Chavrah Kadisha, a lot of times when people arrive in town and in their greeting, they're asked, would you like to add your name to the call list for Chavrah Kadisha? I've had people burst into tears who really wanted to do this work, but were in a community and told either because they were a convert or they weren't Shomer Shabbos, or for some reason they weren't good enough to do this work. And that just breaks my heart, that there are people who are able and willing. So I would say work on the ask. Work hard to find somebody who is passionate, who understands the implications, that recognizing that our Chavrah doesn't, when you ask yourself, who does our Chavrah serve? Obvious choice, we serve the dead. We also serve the mourners, but we also serve the members of the Chavrah Kadisha. And that's the opportunity that they have to be involved in this really holy work. But the bigger is we serve the members of the community as a whole. It changes how people feel about their community, and it changes how communities treat each other. So sometimes when it's we need you, it's not necessarily a good ask, especially when you're asking people to do something they're not familiar with. As opposed to, would you like to be a part of this sacred community? And the ask needs to come from somebody. Like I said, just asking somebody out of the blue to come do this work isn't particularly useful if you haven't created a sense of sacred community where people can do sacred service. Because I think most people want to do sacred service. But I also think we live in a time, those of us who were born shortly after World War II, with really low Jewish self-esteem. For the most part, our teachers, we lost 90% of our teachers, And we were taught by people who didn't know a lot, who were desperately trying to save Judaism. And that's not a really good motivator. And now, 70 years later, 60 years later, 70 years later, oh my God, we've developed new teachers and we've developed new joy, and the beauty of Judaism is now coming back. And we need to put Chavrah Kadisha in that category of our birthright and a wonderful sacred tradition that a whole community can participate in.
Steve, do you want to try and follow that?
Well, let me first say that, Alice, I feel with your issue, just without sort of pushing male or female, just sort of organically, 2/3 of our volunteers are women and 1/3 are men. Maybe that's good. I don't know, but that's what it's turned out to be. And we have enough men to be able to, at least for now, to provide service. But I know I think it's gonna be an issue down the road. So the things I think about are, we have a couple of dozen men now who are volunteers with us, and they can serve as role models in a variety of ways, by making presentations, by being representatives of our Chavrah with various organizations, just by speaking to their friends, telling them what they do. There's a whole variety of ways that men can reach other men in the normal course of business, or by dint of their volunteer work with our Chavrah. And I think that man-to-man is, I think Nina mentioned this too, I think man-to-man can be more powerful than otherwise. I also think that there are logical groups to go to try and speak to. There are, of course, men's clubs, right, or brotherhoods, groups at various organizations. These are people who are service oriented. These are people who are naturally volunteers. They're already got one foot in. And so to be able to get in front of these sorts of folks I think could be a relatively rich source of volunteers. There are also, fascinatingly, in LA anyway, a bunch of rabbis who lead men's groups who talk about men's issues. You know, it's not your typical brotherhood who's building Sukkot and raising money, right? These are guys who get together and talk about, their issues with their children and issues with their families and issues with their upbringing, with their difficult dad, and they talk about more spiritual things too. And these are caring men who are out there trying to figure themselves out and trying to improve themselves. So that's another type of group that one can approach, and I think are sort of ripe for understanding the beauty of what the Chavrah does. I would also say that our most recent male volunteer that we have found is the husband of a woman who died and to whom we provided service. And he is incredibly grateful. And it's not that we asked him, but he came to us and said, Steve, I know what you guys are doing, and I feel so much better about the situation because of what you're doing. And as soon as I get my head back on my shoulders, let's get together, and I'm in. So there are some ideas that I hope will bear fruit for us, and to the extent they're available to you, I suggest you give it a try.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Madison, let's hold off for 1 minute on the pre-ranged ones, and let's do it to Ferret Israel question or comment. Could that be possibly Sue Cattler?
It is.
Hi,
It
Sue.
is. And I thank you, because while I do have a question, I wanted to make a comment on the last question. As far as I know, our male Tahara group is very solid, and we've always had some male doctors in the group, and I think that has helped to recruit other men, because they feel that there's someone there who knows about bodies and stuff. so that groups of male doctors may be an appropriate place to start if you can find a man to go and ask them. But my question is to Nina, and I was wondering what you cook and freeze for your meals of condolences.
Almost
I mean,
anything you can cook and freeze. Baked goods, lasagnas, just anything that we can have pre-made and ready on 24 hours notice to deliver to a Shiva home.
All right, because we at times have gone and made meals for the family to eat during the week and frozen those.
Yeah.
But we never tried the meal of condolence frozen. So, but you're saying basically casseroles.
Yeah. And yes,
Yeah.
they're there for the week. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's interesting. Part of what we have to do, and this fits into your question, is help the community understand the importance of a Shiva visit.
Right.
Being a community of immigrants and young people, a lot of the people who come here don't have a lot of experience with that. And their response is, oh, I don't know this person. I don't know what to do. And so, we put out instructions. And one person who I called and said, we really need some minion makers. Can you be there? And it's like, no, because I can't make anything. It's like, well, can you pick something up at Whole Foods? Oh, I can pick something up at Whole Foods? Yes, I can be there and I can pick something up at Whole Foods. It's hard to recognize what people's barriers are until you find out that somebody who did not feel they could cook something appropriate for a Shiva was refusing to go to Shiva Minions.
Okay.
So,
Steve,
Thank you.
Did you want to comment also, even though Sue didn't direct the question to you? Did you want to comment?
We have not had the opportunity to expand our services beyond Shmirah and Tahara, hopefully down the road. But this is Nina, this is where I disagree with you. I think having too many volunteers was an opportunity for you to get yourselves pushed into these various other beautiful services that you're providing.
Okay. Madison, do we have some of the pre-formatted questions that you can raise to the group?
We do, but I want to bring up a comment that was in the messaging for Nina. And we have Rachel, who's wondering if you would be able to share the instructions that you put out. I'm not sure exactly which instructions Rachel's referring to, but
sorry, the document or what you referenced as the Shiva instructions. It sounds like you have a lot of good resources that you've shared with your community. And I was wondering if you had them electronically that you could share with us.
full disclosure, I am wildly dyslexic and poorly organized. So oftentimes other people have stuff. Generally speaking, it's on the spot of explaining just the bare bones of you are not there to cheer people up. Yeah, you're there to support them. The host becomes the guests become the hosts, and your job is to sit quietly, just to be there. And if they want to share a story with you, they can. Unless, of course, you have a special story about their loved one that was lost. But for these people who have never been to Shiva and don't know the people, it's like it's a mitzvah to just be there so that they'll have a minyan and pick up around the kitchen and put away dirty dishes and just be there and be helpful. And it just takes a lot of, again, when people feel out of their element, they're not likely to want to participate. And so what the general instructions are is just, this is what Shiva is. And this is why even a stranger is valuable at a Shiva minyan, because they make a minyan and because the person feels supported. So thank you.
Okay, good. And Steve, do you also put instructions out to folks to do Shiva, or do you haven't branched out to doing Shiva yet? You're still focusing Tahara and Shmirah.
Correct. I hope to expand services down the road someday. But first, we're trying to ramp up our Tahara and Shmirah services.
Okay, good. And Madison, you have some other questions or comments from the pre-registrations?
Yes, let's start with this one. Although you've addressed part of this question, that they've had a difficult time getting interest in their Chavrah Kadisha, I think the one part of this question we haven't addressed yet, which is what do you do when either your women's group isn't big enough to handle the need, or because you can't start a men's group, it can't handle the need?
Who wants to take a stab at that one?
You want to start, Stephen?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry.
So they're saying that they have need to do the services of Chavrah Kadisha. They have needs. They have people who, want to need services, either Shmirah or whatever, but their group is not big enough to handle the services that people are asking them to provide. So what do you do in the case when your group is too small and there's not enough people to provide the service, the shom, you know what I mean, the services that you need?
Okay, so I would say let's break it down between Tahara and Shmirah. First, I would say for Tahara, you don't need an awful lot of people to do Tahara. If you've got none, then I think what you do, depending on where you are and what regional resources there are, if you have no volunteers or if you got no helpers, you go to the next town over and see if there's someone there, or see if, in our case in Los Angeles, there are a couple of other synagogue-based chevrahs that are not too far from us. And we have had advanced discussions with them about if we had a lack of volunteers in a particular situation, we would reach out to them and hopefully they'd be able to send people over to do whatever we needed. And we would do the same for them. So there may be, depending on where they are and what resources there are regionally, that may be one way to skin the cat, as it were. One of the wonderful stories I heard a couple of years ago at my first Kavod V'Nchum conference was about two young women in New Mexico who were trying to start a Chavrah Kadisha. I forget exactly where, but before they could organize just about anything, someone found out about what they were doing and called them and said, a woman has died and she wants Tahara, can you guys help? And they sort of looked at the story goes, they sort of looked at each other and said, we got this. And they found a manual online and they read it and they brought it with them and they took like 4 hours to do the Tahara, but between the two of them, they did the Tahara. So I think another thing to do is to realize that because there's no prescribed way, as Nina pointed out before, there's no halakha. There, to the extent that you've even got a couple of volunteers, it still may be enough. Certainly on the Tahara side. Now sometimes you run into practical issues, but that's another thing to do. Of course, on the men's side, if you don't have enough men, it's appropriate for women to participate. And so you can try and reach across to the women volunteers if you have women but not men. So that may be another solution for situations with men. And I'm sure there are other ideas too. And Nina, if you've got ideas, please. But as far as Shmirah, you can redefine Shmirah, right? You can try and do Shmirah from the moment the mate arrives at the funeral home until the moment of burial, or you can redefine that to be weekdays only, or you can redefine that to mean only the 24 hours before burial, or you can redefine it to mean only between Tahara and burial, if there's a Tahara. So there's no right or wrong. So maybe sometimes if you can ratchet down the amount of service needed to be provided, that can help the situation. And again, with Shmirah, if there are other folks in neighboring areas or near enough by, maybe you can call on them too. There are also family members for Shmirah that you can invite in to participate. Also, it's probably a little bit easier to set up a virtual Shmirah than to do a virtual Tahara. But in either case, doing things virtually might allow you to connect with volunteers who are available, who might not otherwise be. So there's some thoughts.
Okay, great. So we're open to questions. If
Do I
you,
get a shot at that one?
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nina.
So interestingly enough, we never did fully virtual Tahara. We always had at least one of our members present at the funeral home, caring for the body. At that point, we have employees of the funeral home who have all participated at one time or another. There have been a couple of times when we've had an exceedingly large or person who we were not able to, and they, came in. So all of the funeral home people at our funeral home, one of them is actually one of our former Chavrah members. Their staff all knows what we need. So when we were doing virtual, we would have one person there and 2 staff members. It is amazing when you have professionals in the room, how much easier everything gets. Oh my God, I had no idea. But I think you can enlist help. The other thing, when we have, oftentimes we've had people die like on Thanksgiving or, when everybody's out of town. And we just throw a wider net to the greater community. And sometimes that's people's motivation to step up. So we just expand our mailing list to the whole community and say, we have these slots left. If anybody can help, please take them. And as far as the group in New York started, that's exactly how we started. And that's exactly how we function, that when we're needed, we show up. I'll be honest, we still usually don't have more than 4 or 5 deaths a year. I'm now an aldercocker in the community. So it's a fairly young community still. We have over 150 children in our school. So what I'm saying may not be appropriate in a community that deals with a lot more death than we do. But I do think casting a wider net, especially for Shmira, is an opportunity to get some people involved, especially if doing Shmira gives them access to starting to understand what the Chavrah does. We also always give friends and family first dibs. And in a number of cases, when it's a beloved community member, we have to schedule 2 people for every shift because we can't accommodate the people for whom it's important to be there. Because once people have integrated this idea of that it's an honor to see somebody through with Shmira, we won't turn people away. So when our list gets full, then we double fill slots. So.
Okay, thanks, Nina. So if other folks have questions or comments, you can put it in the chat, or you can physically just raise your hand and wave to us. We're open to all that right now. But Madison may see a few more in the pre-registered list. Go ahead, Madison.
Yes, I'm going to read this one directly because it's really great. How do we get a new rabbi to buy into the precious work of the Chavrah Kadisha and be a conduit with the congregation for promoting Jewish end-of-life rituals like Tahara?
It's a great question. I'll tell you that we've probably been in contact with 30 different, not just rabbis, but sets of clergy in our area, and there are many more than that. But we've sort of targeted the larger congregations, and the vast majority of them really do know very little about Chavrah Kadisha and Tahara and Shmira, which was an eye opener at the beginning. So they're in effect all new rabbis. They're not new on the pulpit, but they're certainly new by way of exposure to Chavrah Kadisha work and Tahara. We have, but that doesn't mean they're not interested, and that doesn't mean they're not willing and able to help and help by means of educating their community, and literally help by being on a Tahara team. Many of them, when hearing about what we're building here and what our goals are and what the Chavrah does, really want to participate so that they can be effective communicators with their, not only with a family who's had a recent death, but with their congregations, whether it be at high holidays or at any sort of end of life oriented education or session. So that's to try and include clergy whenever possible in terms of our service has been an important aspect of getting clergy up to speed. And I'm talking rabbis, chaplains, and cantors, and at every level from senior rabbi through, a chaplain in school right now. Generally, we found that they understand what we're talking about and they're willing to listen. There's a wide variety of interest in sort of bringing the topic to their congregation, and on a wide variety of opinions as to sort of when is best to do it. But in general, I think it's fair to say that our experience has been that they are willing to work with us, and they are willing to work with us to educate their community either directly or indirectly through them. But it takes in our experience, it takes a sit down, it takes a face to face, and it takes and we're lucky enough to have half a dozen rabbis on our team, on our volunteer team, what we've set up as an advisory board of rabbis. To have rabbi to rabbi contact can also be, as I said in my presentation, people listen to rabbis differently than they listen to lay people, and certainly rabbis do.
Okay.
I think in many ways that's part of the problem. Depending on the flavor of the rabbi, they may have never, ever had a single class in Chavrah Kadisha, ever. And they're uncomfortable doing something where they don't feel the expert because they think people expect them to be the expert. So every rabbi who's come through here, when we can communicate to them, this is a major part of our community, and we would love for you to be supportive and do whatever we can to help you understand what we do here. Like I said, we have never had a rabbi here who didn't volunteer to do a tahara and promote what we do. And as soon as they get it, they do a phenomenal amount of promoting. One of our biggest recruiting tools is our Introduction to Judaism class now, which has always been taught by the rabbis, because it's a chance for them to then focus on this as one of the important life cycle events, and they feel competent doing it. I mean, rabbis are no different than other people. We want to feel competent, so we have to help them feel competent. So
Okay. Thanks, Nina. Thanks, Steve. We're open to more questions. If anyone has questions, we have about 5 minutes left or so, 10 minutes most. Anyone else, comments or questions? Did you learn what you wanted to learn? Do you still have questions that you're gonna wish you had asked, or don't have all the information yet that you want to bring back to your Chavrah or synagogue? Now's the time. And Madison, do we have one more from the pre-registered?
The last question from the pre-registration you sort of covered, but I didn't know if you wanted to highlight anything else. What forms of outreach do you think will work? I know you've talked about a few already. And then I just want to let you know that Linda Griff said thank you to both of you for sharing your knowledge today.
Okay. So what the question was, what form of outreach?
Right. Do you think will work?
I think we just have to meet people where they are. I mean, it's going to be a different kind of outreach if it's a senior citizen who's thinking about their own planning than what we would do when we're talking to a B'nai Mitzvah class, which is different than what we would do when we're presenting sewing shrouds. I think we have to continuously meet people where they are. And the approach is whatever a thoughtful approach is to who is our current audience. I mean, like I said, it's going to be very different when you're talking to a rabbi who has basic knowledge, but may never, ever have studied it in any way. So I taught a class at HUC this last winter. And they had never, ever previously had a Chavrah class on the campus, which is kind of shocking.
Well, it's also that they didn't remember that they had previous Chavrah classes.
That's also possible. That's also possible, but it was not part of their curriculum.
Right.
And the two rabbis who were not with HUC, but community rabbis, were the ones who helped set it up. And about 2 weeks before we got there to train, we were having a meeting with them. And one of them said, we are telling people that we're going to be ready and up and running 2 weeks after you're here. Is that even feasible? And my answer was, if a beloved member of your community dies even before we get there, you're already ready. When you make the decision to be ready, you're ready. We're coming to help you fine tune and learn how to do it better. That message of, if your intention is to do holy work, you can do holy work. And training is wonderful in terms of helping you figure out how to do that. So even when you have to figure out who the audience is, but also what's their particular anxiety, what's their particular interest, what's their particular concern. That when we meet people where they are, that's how you present to the community.
Great. And Steve, last tips for people.
Sure. In terms of outreach, being in such a large area and with such a large population, it was such a large unserved or underserved population in terms of Chavrah services. We've taken the approach that trying a lot of different things at the beginning to see what works best. But sort of the overarching decision that we sort of made at the beginning is that brochures are nice and websites are nice and social media is nice, but what really works is face-to-face, whether it's one-on-one or one on a small group, delivered by people, discussions and presentations provided by people with enthusiasm and knowledge. That's our outreach committee is currently working on. We have so many opportunities for outreach. They're working on prioritizing which sort of the low-hanging fruit tends to be the affiliated Jews, so we tend to start there. But they're working on the best ways to do that, and the best ways to get in front of them, and prepping people to do the best job that they can when they do get in front of folks. And that's where we're starting, and we'll probably expand beyond that, but that's going to keep us busy for a while.
Okay, and last question from Art.
I just wanted to say I thought this was a great program, both Nina and Steve. I thought you both presented terrific information. I just wanted to add two things, not on behalf of the Funeral Practices Committee, but in connection with inChevrah, which is the congregation that we belong to. Just a couple other things that they do along with all the things that you were talking about. One is that Addis has a number of people who will actually contact the bereaved family when a death occurs and work with them or communicate with them or meet with them to help them in whatever they need, whether it's preparing for the funeral, making sure people know, making sure people don't get forgotten, making sure they're going to have enough food, and all of those things. And the second is we've got another group of people who will volunteer to help people who may want to say Kaddish for the whether it's 30 days or 11 months after a death. A lot of people are not familiar with minions, familiar with the practice of saying Kaddish at the synagogue. So we have volunteers who will accompany them and help them in various ways to get them comfortable doing that, and also who will make phone calls a week after the death, 30 days after the death, whenever, just to make sure that people are doing okay, and if they have any needs or concerns, that they would meet them. Addis is a very large congregation and has now hired a part-time psychologist, which is an interesting addition, but you can have a psychologist who's not on a synagogue staff, obviously. And one of the things that all of the Addis members who are doing these types of services are alerted to do is if they see any real problems with whether it's a widow or a widower or whoever it is, getting used to the loss, they will contact the clergy at Addis, and the clergy will then reach out and perhaps make a referral to the now in-house psychologist, who's also leading grief sessions and various other things for family members who have recently suffered losses. So there really are a lot of ways. I mean, you in Los Angeles, Steve, you can just keep adding to your list of possibilities. And Nina, I think, does all these things anyway. So Nina's been doing this for so long.
That is an incredibly fabulous resource to have.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to add that to the general mix. But thank you both for the participation, and obviously thank everybody for coming. And because this will be recorded, our audience of whatever it was, 17, I'm sure will expand by a factor of 17 over the coming months.
Thank you, everyone, and especially thank you to Steve and Nina for presenting for us today. Thank you for everyone who participated, and for those who are going to be listening to the recording. We hope you enjoy it and get lots out of it. And if you have other comments or questions about this program or about anything in particular, you can write us. You can get Art's contact and my contact information from the website. If you didn't capture the website address before, it's jewishfuneralsdc.org, and we'd be glad to hear from you. And we'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So have a great Sunday, and we'll see you all later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, all. Good to meet you.
And Madison, we shouldn't turn off the recording.
Yep, that's what I'm doing now. Sorry.
Hi, Bob. It's the real you.